Jon Snow has to be one of the most well-known characters in A Song of Ice and Fire. In fact, when you think of Game of Thrones, no doubt one of the first people you think of is him. No doubt a large part of that is due to the performance of Kit Harington in the TV series, who I think for what he was given, did a really good job with Jon, even if his character deviated heavily from his book counterpart after a while. But I digress. The bastard of Winterfell, the son of Eddard Stark, Lord Commander of the Night's Watch, and at least by the show's continuity, King in the North, albeit for a brief time. He might become king in the books too, since Robb does write a will before he dies, and discusses with his mother Catelyn potentially legitimizing Jon, so the Northern Crown won't die with him. Since Rickon and Bran are presumed dead at this point, and with Sansa married to Tyrion, they really need to try and keep Winterfell out of enemy hands. There are a lot of mysteries that surround Jon Snow, and what kind of role he'll play in the prophecy of Azor Ahai, and the Long Night, when winter finally comes. But for the longest time, one of the biggest shadows that's hung over the character of Jon Snow is his roots. Who really is Jon Snow? Where did he come from? Who does he come from? And what does that mean for the story moving forward? These are questions that we've had to ask, and that have hung over us from the beginning of the series. And it's hung over Jon as well, as he laments not knowing who his mother really is, and where he falls in the world. We're given a few possibilities throughout the story. At first, we're told his mother is a common woman named Wylla. Then we're given the idea that maybe it was a woman named Ashara Dayne, the sister to Arthur Dayne, the Sword of the Morning, who Ned had a crush on when he was younger. Barristan Selmy says that she was dishonored by Stark at Harrenhal, when talking to Daenerys about Eddard, but he never specifies which Stark dishonored her, because Brandon, Ned's older brother, was there too, at Harrenhal. Ashara took her own life in the books, and there are varying speculations as to why. One such theory is her giving birth to a stillborn bastard daughter. I've seen some people theorize that this baby might have been Jon, and that Ned took him from Ashara when he brought Arthur's sword back to Starfall after the rebellion was over. But if this story is true, and she really did have a relationship with the Stark, I find it more likely that Brandon was the one who dishonored Ashara and potentially got her pregnant, and that it was his child that she ultimately lost. He was more prone to sleeping around than Ned, and even George Martin has stated that Brandon most likely has some flakes of snow out there in the wind. However, in spite of these theories, Season 6 of Game of Thrones tries to give us a more concrete answer that seems more likely than the others. Now, in this video, I am not going to debate whether I believe Rhaegar and Lyanna are actually the parents of Jon Snow in the books. Even with the misgivings that we may have for the show's continuity, I believe that this is an ultimate fact of the universe that just has yet to be revealed in the books, just like how Jon has yet to come back from the dead in the books as well. And it's this one possibility that has the most relevance and potential narrative importance long term. I say potential because even after Jon was revealed to be a long-lost Targaryen in the show, and this information was constantly brought up and built up as this grand thing, it ultimately didn't matter in the end. It really only served to have some level of contention in his relationship with Daenerys, and aid her in going mad. And we have no idea how the books will tackle this reveal, as Show Jon and Book Jon are fairly different characters. But moving on. Today I'm going to be analyzing some aspects of the pairing of Jon's parents, and how this relates to his identity in the story moving forward. Now, in Game of Thrones, things are pretty clear when it comes to this union. Rhaegar supposedly annulled his marriage to Elia and married Lyanna instead, which would arguably make Jon a Targaryen prince. But I'm going to touch more on the logistics of that a bit later on in the video. In the books, while I do believe it's only a matter of time before the reveal is made, the hard truth is this union between the dragon and wolf, of ice and fire, is shrouded in a lot of mysteries, and the specifics of Jon's birth are very much up for debate. We don't really know everything about the situation between his parents, and what really happened between them in the books. Now, I will say that I don't think Rhaegar actually forced himself on Lyanna. I think she went with him willingly, though it is still creepy that this man in his 20s, with a wife and kids, pursued a teenager, even if it was for the sake of prophecy. And one of the main reasons that I don't believe that this was forced is Ned. Ned in the books doesn't seem to hate Rhaegar or any of the Targaryens despite having plenty of reasons to. King Aerys murdered his father and brother, so no one would blame him for holding it against the entire family, and the common consensus in Westeros is that Rhaegar stole Lyanna away. Ned can also hold grudges. He hates the Lannisters, even after all these years since the rebellion, because of what Jaime did to King Aerys and what Tywin did to the city and Rhaegar's family after his late entry into the war. He doesn't hesitate to let his opinions be known, but you don't really see that with Rhaegar. Ned does think back to the Tower of Joy and his sister's final moments, but he rarely thinks of Rhaegar, nor does he ever indulge Robert when he goes into his rants and ravings about the guy either. From what we can glean about Ned from his brief time in the series, is that he isn't overly fond of Rhaegar, but he's not overly critical or hateful of him either. Which you might find odd if you believe the story that Rhaegar took Lyanna against her will. So I think Lyanna could have potentially told Ned the truth before she died, and that plays a factor as to why he never seems to bring up Rhaegar if he doesn't have to, or outright demonize him like a lot of other people. But even if we do say that this relationship was consensual, we don't know if Rhaegar actually married Lyanna in the books. It's a fact in the show, but here it might be a different story. This is important, because if Jon is the son of Lyanna and Rhaegar, but they never married, Rhaegar's sole purpose being producing a third child regardless of legitimacy, then he would still be Jon Snow. You could make the argument that his real name is Sand, given that he was born in Dorne, but considering that he was raised in the North his entire life, we'll probably stick with Snow. It sounds better anyway. But if this is true, then Jon Snow is not some long-lost Targaryen prince. He's a dragon seed. A bastard still, and like all bastards, is unable to inherit unless he's legitimized. Robb's potential legitimization of Jon most likely wouldn't matter in this context, since he's legitimizing him as a Stark and cementing his inheritance of the Northern Throne instead of the Iron one. So even if he is acknowledged, the claim would still be considered null and void even as king in the North, especially since Robb has no dominions over the lands to the south, so he realistically can't make Jon a Targaryen. As it stands right now, if Jon really is a Targaryen bastard, there may not be anyone who would actually want to legitimize him anyway. Tommen is king right now in the books, and not only is he a child, he doesn't even know Jon. He has no reason to legitimize him when he would just be adding another threat to his position. Young Griff, if he indeed takes the throne of Westeros, wouldn't be in the worst position if Jon was legitimized. As the son of Rhaegar Targaryen and Elia Martell, he would come right before Jon in terms of succession, and if this were the case and the truth about Jon came out, maybe after he claims the North, he could offer his half-brother legitimacy, and perhaps name him heir to the Iron Throne, at least until he has a son of his own, in an attempt to bring the North back into the fold of the kingdoms, and slowly begin restoring the Targaryen family. It doesn't sound like too bad of a plan, though that path is also not without risk, because younger brothers have usurped elder ones before, so we may not want to take that chance regardless. Then there's the theory that young Griff is actually a Blackfire in disguise, using the name of Rhaegar's dead son to claim the throne for himself. If that's indeed true, then chances are he won't legitimize Jon under any circumstances. The Blackfires have been trying to take the throne of Westeros for years, and that would just make him competition in the long run, especially if the truth came out. Then there's Daenerys, who might not legitimize Jon either, because as the son of Rhaegar Targaryen, that would put him in front of her in regards to the line of succession as well. And given everything that she's been through and fought for, she may not want to risk losing it all by giving her brother's son the family name. There's hardly any benefit in giving someone a valid challenge that they could use against you. So Jon could have Targaryen blood, but with him remaining a bastard, it could just leave him back at square one. Unless he's going to fight his possible half-brother and aunt for the throne. Book Jon is a bit more ambitious than Show Jon, so anything could be possible. Especially since resurrection in the books tends to have more side effects than we saw in the show. Aside from this possibility, annulment is also something that's brought up in the story, and in the TV series, it's what's used to justify Jon's legitimacy as a Targaryen prince, as Rhaegar supposedly set aside Elia Martell for Lyanna Stark. If we assume this instance occurred in both the show and the book, would this really be valid grounds when it comes to Jon being a legitimate Targaryen prince? I've actually talked about this in some of my other videos, especially when it pertains to Lyanna and her relationship with Rhaegar, and what this leaves for Jon when it comes to his status in Westeros. I explore some of the ramifications of this possible annulment in my What If Rhaegar Won the Rebellion video, which is to date my most viewed video on the channel. By all means, go give it a look and judge for yourself if you haven't already, but I digress. Annulment doesn't really happen often in Westeros, but it does exist, and typically it's used when marriages aren't exactly fruitful or go unconsummated. In cases like that, there is a standard for divorce. It even happens to Marjorie Tyrell in the books. Because she claims to have never slept with Renly before his death, the marriage is considered to be unlawful and like it never happened in the first place, thus making her eligible for Joffrey despite being a traitor. That being said, I can't say that I see an annulment being something that holds up well in regards to Jon's legitimacy. It doesn't have the typical foundation because Rhaegar can't claim his marriage to Elia went unconsummated or unproductive. They had 2 children, Rhaenys and Aegon. Rhaegar sired an heir to the Iron Throne. By all accounts, something came out of this union, and even if Elia was at risk of death with a 3rd child, I find it hard to believe that anyone would find that to be valid reasoning for an annulment. Then there are even more issues that could be presented if this decision had in fact occurred. If the people found out about a supposed annulment, I believe there would be many who wouldn't support it or see it as legitimate in the slightest, given that it was handled in secret without the authority or knowledge of the king at the time, and Rhaegar's wife Elia. Now, people in the fandom do theorize that Elia actually knew and was okay with it, but as it stands, in the story, we do not know that, and I don't think that there are any hints to suggest otherwise either. Even if we do ignore Elia though, everyone else who bore witness to this marriage and could possibly swear to how official it is not around. Not the Septon who officiated it, not Rhaegar or Lyanna because they're both dead, or any of the Kingsguard who might have stood and witnessed it. We could say that there is still a record of the marriage, but seeing as this probably happened in the absence of the High Septon who normally signs off on this stuff, Rhaegar's father who orchestrated his match to Elia, his wife, and her family, who most likely did not agree to this, many might just disregard it entirely, seeing the foundation of this annulment as flimsy and just plain unlawful, as there are no definitive grounds for him to set Elia aside. And once again, I think we fall into that same idea that the current monarchs, Tommen, Aegon, and Dany, would be the only ones to decide if the match was official or not, and if it should be respected or acknowledged at all, which they have no reason to do. And this also isn't even mentioning that some people might outright refuse to acknowledge Jon as the son of Rhaegar if this truth were to come out anyway. It's made a point in the books that Jon looks just like a Northerner. In fact, he looks more like a Northerner than any of Catelyn's children with Ned, and that also plays a role into why she doesn't like Jon that much in the books. She sees him as a threat. If this random kid from the north is lifted up as a lost Targaryen prince, some people might laugh it off because he looks nothing like them. But even with that being said, there have been Targaryens that go against the mold. Duncan the Small, the son of Aegon V, had dark hair like his mom. Baelor Breakspear, the son of Daeron the Good, looked Dornish like his mom, Mariah Martell. And even Rhaegar's own daughter Rhaenys looked more Dornish than she did Targaryen, to the point where Aerys refused to hold her. He really hated the Dornish, and barely tolerated Elia. So these are some valid counter-arguments, but I don't doubt that there would be people who would use Jon's looks against him as an argument, especially in view of his other relatives. The only other option that I could think of that might make Jon legitimate, if we assume that Rhaegar did indeed marry Lyanna, is that he did so outside the norms of Westeros, forgoing Westerosi culture, the faith of the Seven, and perhaps returning to his Valyrian roots. I don't think it's entirely out of the question. Rhaegar is often talked about as if he's the second coming of Aegon the Conqueror, or at least the next great Targaryen king when it comes to those who knew him. He's referred to as the Last Dragon, and his death is typically seen as the true end of House Targaryen. Rhaegar is seen as this guy who might have brought the next golden age of his family, though we have no way of knowing if he actually could have done that, or if the glaze was purely because he was just better than Aerys for the time. The Targaryens have been known to take multiple wives, so it is possible that instead of annulling his marriage to Elia, He returned to his heritage and went through a Valyrian ceremony to take Lyanna as a second wife, which could make Jon legitimate in theory, but this would have its fair share of issues as well. It's funny, because I do see people ask in some of my videos why Rhaegar didn't just take a second wife, and they think that it would have solved a lot of problems if he did. But relationships like this have only ever happened with two other Targaryens, because polygamy is not accepted in Westeros. The only two exceptions were made for Aegon the Conqueror and his son Maegor the Cruel. Aegon married both his sisters, and afterwards subjugated the 7 kingdoms of Westeros with them. After asserting his dominance over the realm, no one was willing to challenge him when it came to who he married. But when Maegor the Cruel took a second wife, he was actually exiled by his brother Aenys, and he had constant problems with the faith over this, especially as he added more wives to his roster. It was only after he secured his reign with blood and fire that people eventually stopped pushing the issue with him. Like his father before him, he had to let people know that he was not the one to be played with, and made it so they had no choice but to accept what he was doing. Even Daemon from House of the Dragon tries to take a second wife, and it does not end well. No one acknowledges this potential union, and Daemon just ends up getting himself exiled for a bit. If it were to come to light that Rhaegar and Lyanna married in a Valyrian ceremony, given the faith's stance on polygamy, people would still refuse to acknowledge Jon as a prince or legitimate heir in any capacity, since they don't recognize the rights in which his parents' union was formed and he was later conceived. So, no matter how we look at it, if and when it's revealed that Jon is the son of Rhaegar and Lyanna, he is more than likely going to be a dragon seed instead of a dragon prince or a dragon king. He could be king in the north, given Robb's will that's still floating around out there, but the Iron Throne might just be a pipe dream unless something changes. A possible theory that I have in mind that I could see playing out, depending on how things go, is through Dany. Assuming we get their relationship in the books like we did in the show, perhaps something that could happen is she does agree to legitimize Jon, but only as a way to strengthen her own claim to the Iron Throne, by marrying who could be the last son of Prince Rhaegar, and through this union unite the North with the rest of the 7 kingdoms once again. To further cement herself and this proposal, she might also insist that for this to work, Jon would have to publicly renounce his claim in favor of her. It wouldn't be the first time a Targaryen has given up his birthright for love. See Duncan the Small once again. But those are my general thoughts on Jon as a possible Targaryen prince. More than likely, he is just going to be a dragon seed, but in no way does that mean he won't play an important role in future events. And if he is given the title of prince and is seen as true-born, there would be questions about how valid that really is, or at least I think there should be. Especially for a world like this, where everything is almost always scrutinized. That's all I have for you guys today, though. I hope you all enjoyed it. Don't forget to like, subscribe, give me your thoughts down below, and I will see you all next time.